Let me introduce myself first. So I'm with Modalis Infrastructure Partners. I have too many years in the airport industry, many digits after in there. I've worked in government when government was responsible for airports. I've worked for Airport Authority. I worked quite a number of years with Vancouver Airport Authority, the first airport authority in Canada. I worked for one of the preeminent airport operators and investors in the world, Vancouver Airport Services at the time, now Vantage Airport Group. And the last 20 years, I've worked as a consultant through a number of vehicles, my own consulting company, and more recently with Modalis Infrastructure Partners. So that's me. So our first participant is Chris Van Oate. He's a senior airport consultant with Van Oate International Inc. I met Chris through the other Modalis folks, through a number of other projects that we've worked on. As I said, I'm going to let him introduce himself a little more. George Hohlacov, Director of Airport Planning, Denver International. I had to twist George's arm to participate in this thing, but I reminded him that, I gave him his first job in airports over 20 years ago, so he owed me one. And Jonathan Hanna, Director of Operations on Lynden Pindling International Airport, Nassau, Bahamas. Jonathan is a good client of mine. And again, I had to twist his arm to get on this thing. I promised him reduced fees on our next project, but you're supposed to forget that as soon as I said it. Sorry, Frodo, if we can go to the next slide, I'll just introduce the topics. So we're going to use three sort of bullet points topics to sort of talk around this particular subject. So the first will be, how can scenario planning for a COVID world inform future airport facility needs while maximizing return on investment? Because we know, I guess, we're all in the private airport business. Most of us are. So return on investment, really important. Planning airport terminals with flexibility to accommodate various health alert levels. And then why creativity, flexibility, innovation will be key to airport planning in the post-COVID world. So someone, I won't say who, but I think it'll be obvious later, put this quote in here at the bottom. By being rigid, you become temporary. By being flexible, you become permanent. And, it's interesting that, these individuals have come up with these words, because anybody that knows me, so I've done a lot of airport planning, as I indicated, over the years. My favorite words when I'm talking about airport planning, whether it's master planning or terminal planning, is, flexibility, adaptability, feasibility, stageability, expandability, all these key words, because one thing we know about the future is it never seems to look like what we thought it would look like. And anyway, so we need all those things. So it's good to see somebody's been listening. So what I'll do now is I'll turn the floor over to Chris first to introduce himself a little further and talk about his topic.
Great, thank you, Peter. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. So my name is Chris Van Oate. I've been in the airport planning, design, and construction arena for 33 years all around the world. And to your point, Peter, one of my more recent projects was a $2 billion design build international terminal in the Middle East. And in the middle of that project, we were making all sorts of changes based on what airlines were doing in the region and different changes in the middle of that design build project. Now we're in a COVID world and looking at the post-COVID world. There's a lot of unknowns that we didn't have to consider So my point is, even in the world we used to live in, it was challenging to plan, design, and build a big piece of airport infrastructure. Now, it's certainly more challenging. So I want to talk about the unknowns and how scenario planning can be a useful tool for many different types of airports. So what are some of the variables we're looking at now? Certainly, COVID is a variable, how long it will last. Even vaccines would be a variable, what will happen with vaccines and how reliable are they? Global economic recovery, permanent shifts in business travel, international tourism impacts, economic growth in the future. And I'm not just talking about the next year or two, right? We just had a discussion this morning on a panel about permanent shifts in business travel. So some people think that's going to happen. And I was leading a recent team meeting with 20 people, all remote. We had a Teams meeting and we had a Zoom meeting simultaneously. Everybody had their roles set up, roles and responsibilities during the meeting, and it was the most productive meeting we'd ever had. We used to do them face-to-face in Washington, D.C. every month. And after that meeting, we said, why are we spending $50,000 every meeting when this actually worked better and we didn't have to travel and lose time? So, these are just questions. I don't think there's a lot more questions than answers at this point. So how could scenario planning fit into this, and why would it be useful? First of all, every airport is different. Every airport would come up with different scenarios that are relevant to that particular airport. But the way it would work in my mind is an airport would develop different scenarios, scenario A, B, and C. This is not like the high, medium, and low range in aviation demand forecasting. It's nothing like that. These are very different scenarios that might have to do with what could happen with my hub airline, what might happen with international tourism that might impact you, Jonathan, more than other airports. What may happen with international business travel or international tourism in general. And so the scenario planning would look at very different scenarios, scenario A, B, and C, that look at what might happen with all of those independent variables. And then once that is defined at a very high level, this is not at a master planning level, at a very high level, you could look at how that would impact your aviation demand forecasts, international, domestic, fleets, destinations, peak hour, at a very high level. And looking at those different scenarios and the different traffic that would likely result from those scenarios, you could then say, what would that mean for my facility in the next 2 years, in the next 5 years, right? I'm not necessarily talking 20 years down the road here, although that could factor into it if you're talking about how you may phase the development for a big project, okay? And then with those three scenarios, you could start to identify perhaps common elements that you would need in all three scenarios. If you can identify common elements, that's an advantage, because that would give you kind of a lower risk perspective of saying, well, we would have to do this in any of the scenarios. We need to, we should really plan and design this now so it's on the shelf and ready to be implemented as we need it, or maybe immediately. And you may look at your 5-year plan and try to decide what is a lower risk development that would meet the demand in some of these different scenarios, but have some flexibility in it as well. So there's sort of a speed or a timing element to this as well, to be prepared for different scenarios. Even in some cases, you may do some planning or preliminary design to be prepared to do some different things for that 5-year time frame. So this is not an exact science. There's a lot of judgment involved in it, but it can be a very useful tool to take a step back in this post-COVID world, because there's so many things that we don't know, not just in the next 6 months, but maybe in the next 3 to 5 years, really. Some of these impacts are going to be longer term. And so I guess I'll just say one other thing. These scenarios can also be updated or changed, every few months as things in the world change, as a vaccine comes on board, or economic conditions change in the global economy, with tourism, with trade, everything that impacts our airports and airport demand and airport facilities. So it's not meant to be something you do once and it might just inform you for today. It's kind of an ongoing process to help us be better prepared to quickly respond to what the future may bring. I know it may sound a little general in nature. If you got into a scenario planning exercise, it would quickly become very concrete at a particular airport. Again, every airport is different. I worked at 4 different airports in Brazil. If scenario planning were applied to those 4 airports, they would all be completely different, because one was a business airport, one was a tourist airport, Rio de Janeiro, more tourism. So every airport is different, but I think it's something to consider that in this world of unknowns that we're living in, and it probably is going to be unknowns for quite some time, it might be a useful tool to apply, and it can be done in a short time frame. It's not something that needs to take, certainly not years, but months. So that's a very brief overview of scenario planning. Be happy to field questions now or later as appropriate, Peter.
Yeah, let's let each speaker speak, and then we'll open it up to each other and others. Great. So George.
Okay.
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is George Hohlacov. I'm Director of Airport Planning at Denver International Airport in Colorado, US. I want to thank Peter Bianconi and Chris GAD for inviting me to this panel discussion. It's certainly a very interesting topic, and crazy times we are living in right now. This year is quite something. So I've been in aviation airport planning for a long time, and I date back with Peter Bianconi to my Vancouver airport years. Worked lots of airports around the world. So worked in Vancouver, worked in the UK for Manchester Airport Group, and then worked for ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization, as airport master planning expert. Went to the Middle East and been advising on development of 20 odd airports and some new ones, and then have been working at Toronto Pearson Airport, the largest Canadian airport, and then this opportunity came, and so moved to Denver. So been with Denver Airport for about a year and a half now, and we were all, I guess, caught off guard when this thing started happening. I was listening to BBC World News podcast, my favorite one, for my dog walks, and been starting to hear about this thing happening in China in December, late December, and then January and so on. And then all of a sudden it basically flooded the world, and we all found ourselves in some uncharted territory. I was recently looking at some chart of world passenger numbers from 1945 to this date, and this kind of drop is so unprecedented, unlike any other crisis that has struck us. All the others you see actually as a little blip maybe a 1 or 2 years drop, and then it kind of stays flat, and then it bounces back. This one is actually, 50, 60%. So it's quite something. And certainly raises a lot of questions about, what do we do as airport planners in this post-COVID world? Because, there might be after COVID-19, there might be COVID-25, COVID-32, and so on and so forth. So how we prepare ourselves for that, and how we kind of get ready. And so, as you all know, I think my thought and idea was, as we had established various security threat levels post 9/11 in particular, so we have red, yellow, green or something, and we know what are the procedures and things we do at each different threat level. I was thinking of, as we are so, everything is global nowadays, and these things spread so fast like wildfire, that some sort of health alert levels might be a useful planning tool to say, okay, if we are in normal state, so there is vaccine, everybody is fine, it's almost business as usual, how things work and what are the requirements for all the airport processes and procedures. And then if we're in yellow and red alert level, so then we deploy, okay, now we need to have, social distancing, physical distancing, we have to all wear masks, we have to put up, screens, we need to basically do, extra, cleaning and additional, more frequent procedures to kind of keep us safe. So obviously, with a higher health alert level, we see that because of the physical distancing and such, we need to have either more queuing space or more processing capacity and such. And that brings the idea of, how you have various plans for various kind of health alert levels that you can deploy. So for example, if it's increased health alert level, you go into this more decentralized process, right? So where you have some temporary facilities that you can quickly reactivate and then use for that additional, capacity, that you need if you're not able to provide additional space in the terminal, right? So you kind of spread your processing spaces outside of your terminal, maybe, use some, hangar space or that can be converted, to be a temporary, either testing facility or some decentralized processing facility. So that's something that we've been looking anyways at Denver, trying to basically see how we can decentralize certain processes and, have them happen earlier before you come to the terminal. So that's something that definitely helps with these increased health alert levels that we foresee. The other thing I would like to point out is that because of the international nature of aviation business, you have to have, certain standards and certain agreement and consensus between the governments and, all the countries, civil aviation authorities and such, on an international level to kind of to basically prevent what we're seeing now, passengers being anxious because they don't know, what is the rule in country Y where they're trying to fly, and then also seeing, like we've seen in the UK, people panicking come back this summer from France and other places because all of a sudden the government changes the rules almost on the fly, and you're now kind of thinking, okay, it would be nice to actually have these rules kind of more kind of in sync and more standardized. So I think once we have that and once we have these health alert levels set out, then we can actually get on with planning our current and future airport and terminal facilities accordingly, right? So it would mean also that you can have in a very high level, alert level, you can shut down certain portions of your facilities and infrastructure. So you kind of save and just, keep what you need. and be able to accommodate certain aircraft being parked on the airfield and such, and also trying to kind of consolidate operations. And again, to Chris's note, every airport is a different beast, and every airport has its own needs and its own clients and its own kind of market composition, right? So some airports we've seen where it was easier to actually consolidate, shut down whole terminals. In some airports, it's not so easy to execute that, right? And such. So I think with that, I just want to actually spark some discussion and to invite, I see that we have probably a handful of people attending our session to actually provoke some thinking and provoke some questions. So with that, I'd like to hand it back to you, Peter, and over to Jonathan, I guess.
Okay, so let's move on to Jonathan, and then we'll open the floor to everyone and see what transpires. Jonathan.
Thanks, Peter. So good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're viewing in the world. My name is Jonathan Hanna. I'm the Director of Operations for the Lynden Pindling International Airport in Nassau, Bahamas. I recently got promoted literally at the start of the pandemic, so someone's playing a joke on me somewhere, but it's been very interesting managing operations over the last 8 months. Worked in several different airports. Our airport is a part of the Vantage Airport Group, and so I've had the unique privilege of working at Fort St. John in British Columbia, LaGuardia in New York. Previously worked at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta Airport, and my background is about 10 years or so in the industry after going to college for aviation management with a master's in airport development. So last but not least, the topic that I got from this was, or the opening statement that I really wanted to lead with was, by being rigid, you become temporary, but by being flexible, you become permanent. And I think that's what we've all seen since the start of this pandemic. Change has been the only constant. Every day, almost every hour, there seems to be one, updated quarantine periods, depending on which country you're going to. New requirements, mask use. There's been so much information. It's almost like drinking out of a fire hose since about March. But I just wanted to take you guys a little bit down the road of give you a local aspect of how this is played out. So typically, passengers arrive at the airport about 1 to 3 hours before their flight. They proceed to the check-in area. They go to security, and then they're in the gate area or food court areas or retail areas until it's time to board their flight. And so this has been commonplace in our industry for years. I mean, since I've been a small kid, this is how it's been done. But all of that is in jeopardy now as a result of COVID-19. I don't know how many persons would have seen ACI's ASQ survey recently that they just released results, I think a day before yesterday or 2 days ago, 3 days ago. They surveyed 4,100 prospective travelers. And one question in particular spoke to each passenger about how afraid they were to contract COVID-19 in various areas throughout the journey. So at the airport, on the airplane. At the airport, 28% of passengers were scared about contracting COVID in a commercial area. 26% was in the washrooms, 22% in the security area. So based on the available knowledge, and we all been engaging in mask wearing and social distancing and staying 6 feet apart, we have two options available to us in this industry, which is one, we can make the facilities larger, which I don't necessarily agree with. Or two, we can try to get creative and see how much flexibility we can bring into our airport ops life and planning life as well. So constructing terminals or planning to construct larger terminals, there's so many issues with that. And I'll give you a local perspective because it's what we're facing now, or the government of Bahamas is facing. So the government of Bahamas is faced with they own and operate 28 airports. Given the large makeup of our island chain, there are over 700 islands and keys. And so imagine having what the capital outlay would be to increase the size of 28 airports. All of the airports now are at a point where they've passed their useful life and they want to provide better facilities. Obviously, tourism is our number one industry in the Bahamas. And so, the government is pushing to increase tourism to these out islands. And so just imagine the capital outlay that would take to increase the size for 28 airports outside of what we normally would design for. There's increased maintenance costs that go along with it. There's a larger impact on the environment, which is the last thing that we want to do, especially in our area where just last year we had a devastating hurricane that wiped out 2 islands. So it's not something that we want to do in terms of contributing to climate change and the rise in temperatures. And then again, like I said, the cost is exorbitant. It's not something we want to do. So the way I approach this, I think we would be better off becoming creative and flexible in the way we plan and operate, sharing of information. I think that's what's really going to be key. So instead of using that money to make terminal space larger or increasing the size of the terminals, why not spend money on utilizing technology and designing for maximum flexibility rather than increasing in size? In fact, I would almost be daring to say that airports will continue to be the same size, if not smaller, which I know is a bit, hair-raising to say, but I truly feel that way. And so let's take the 6-foot social distancing rule that we've all heard a million times since the start of the pandemic. So studies have shown that if a person sneezes, it travels as much as 25 feet or greater, potentially. There's a bunch of other factors and variables that need to be factored in, but that risk is real, which is why we're all wearing masks, when we go out in public to ensure that we protect ourselves and to protect others. But so just imagine increasing the terminal size that much more. So for us, I think we're better off looking at a plethora of different creative ideas to manage our operations better, where we can ensure that physical distancing still continues to take place. We can reduce as many touch points as possible, limiting that physical interaction. And so here's a couple of ideas that I want to throw out to the group, just to kind of get everyone thinking of what that could potentially look like. So decentralized operations. Here in the Bahamas, everyone typically comes in. I mean, we have the ability to check in online, but people typically come in to check in for their flights. They go through security and we're a pre-clearance facility here for the US. So they go through pre-clearance depending on if you're traveling to the US or not, and then they'll go on. But imagine working with our hotel partners to actually have persons complete as much of the check-in process and bag tagging process at the hotel before they even leave. So imagine you can check in, get your bag tagged, and now instead of having to come into the terminal to check in, you literally just go to a bag drop and then you're on your way into security. That's something that's being done now in certain airports. I think Las Vegas does it right now. And I'm sure that our partners would be even happier because now the passengers would be even happier because they can spend that much more time at the destination, going to the beach, taking a swim, swimming with the dolphins, whatever they want to do. Retail is another area that I think will change. Right now there's duty frees and a bunch of different concessions, food and beverage, but Amazon, I think we've all seen over the past 10 to 15 years, has been such a big disruptor in the retail industry. Imagine that you could order your duty free online before you depart or arrive, and then it'll be at the gate waiting for you and you just pick it up rather than having a physical store or a static store. Use of technology to reduce physical touch points. So e-gates, biometrics. Delta recently rolled out on board some of their aircraft where they can now utilize their own mobile device to interact with that platform. So television screens rather than touching it. That's something that also can be done at check-in. Instead of you going to a check-in kiosk, you can use your own mobile device that you know where it's been. You don't have to worry about cleaning or sanitizing or disinfecting the kiosk before you use it. And not, no one of these measures is going to solve the problem. But when used in a combination thereof, now we start to increase social distancing in the airports. We have greater flexibility, we have more capacity, and there's so much more that we can do as airport operators or planners, even down again to retail, static displays. They're just a thing of the past now. It's like, you can start to get so much more granular and specific based on flight activity or, passenger demographics and profile demographics. So this is something that I really wanted to push out to the group, because I think this is the only way we safeguard our future. Obviously, our industry is a resilient one. After 9/11, there were a lot of security enhancements that had to be made. Obviously, after this pandemic, there are a lot of health issues that need to be identified and worked out. To George's point earlier, depending on where a passenger is flying, because the information is changing so much, it's hard to almost keep track of it all. But I think what this does and what we have the opportunity to do in the next 3 to 5 to 10 years is safeguard this. So there inevitably will be another pandemic. COVID-21, COVID-20. We've seen, pandemics and epidemics over the past couple of years, but they have never reached this proportion. And so how do we as an industry adapt and respond to make sure that, the next time a pandemic, raises its ugly head, we aren't affected to the degree that we've been affected, especially here in the Bahamas. I can tell you, we had our best year last year, followed by literally what's been our worst year. We welcomed just about 4 million visitors last year. Year over year, we were seeing double-digit growth, only to have this pandemic come, and because of the border restrictions and countries closing, we were down some months as much as 99%, and that's a killer for a tourism-driven economy. So this is why it's so near and dear to my heart that we continue to figure out what we can do to safeguard our future. Over to you, Peter.
Okay, thank you, guys. Just before opening, I don't see nobody's trying to ask any questions via the chat line. So I'll take this opportunity just to expand on a couple of the points that that have been made, Jonathan and others. One of the points that Jonathan made on technology. Technology is very important. We just completed a study for our client. I won't say where right now, but we just completed a study for a client, and we were asked to look at the terminal and determine what is the maximum capacity of this terminal, by minimizing, investment in additional space. So, how could we get more people through this terminal, but with the same space, effectively the same space? And, the results of that study showed that, with the proper use of technologies, things like self-serve kiosks or mobile kiosks on your phone for check-in, and all this new technology with self-serve bag drops, with e-gates for checking, your boarding pass, your passport, security, new procedures in security, all of the variety, things like facial recognition. The results of that study showed that the existing terminal facility that this client had could actually process, somewhere between 50 and 60% more people than was its, indicated capacity, at the time, based on more conventional operations and conventional analytical techniques. So, technology, and that's a technology that we know now, as opposed to technology that we don't know about, So, for instance, typically at security, processing capacity has been stagnant at 200 passengers an hour, per security lane. With these new multiple divesting stations and CT scans and all that other stuff, we're seeing some of those numbers go up to 250, maybe closer to 300, depending on the design and the machinery. But remember, we used to be at 400 back in the good old days, before we started doing liquids and stuff. So we've actually been going backward. Technology is trying to bring us back to where we used to be. But with new technology, with things like facial recognition and better stuff, when you can walk straight through a security machine, just imagine the numbers. Some people have talked about 800 passengers an hour being able to walk through a security station by not having to take everything out, so that's one of the technologies we don't have yet. But so technology that, as we know it, has really brought us along, and future technology. So we really need to work on that. And as Jonathan says, that's right. Potentially, we know that we can put 50, 60% more people through the same terminal. With newer technologies, we might even be able to double the capacity of the space that we have. So in some cases, we might not be, we might never have to expand the Bahamas there, Nassau, right? Hopefully we will. You'll get so many tourists.
Yeah,
everybody wants to go there. I want to jump on an airplane and see those beautiful white sands and the turquoise waters, and I'm itching. So that was one point I just wanted to bring up on Jonathan's side. And Jonathan also brought up, and as did George, offsite check-in. And some of the tourist airports that we've been working on, and in this case I will mention the client. We're doing work in Cyprus, at both Paphos and Larnaca airports, and they're very tourist oriented, as is Jonathan's airport, and most of the travel there is tour groups, and so some of the carriers are doing complete offsite check-in. So they basically go to the hotel and check everybody, into the flight. Right at the hotel. They then board the buses, and they show up at the terminal, and they have their boarding passes, they have everything. And so offsite check-in, is being used, in special situations by certain carriers, and so it's been shown it can be done. It's just a matter of, again. Some of them are using technology, some of them are not. Actually, one of the carriers we're aware of, they pre-print the boarding passes at the airport and you just go out and give them to everybody. So that's old technology, but other ones are using newer stuff. So those things are happening. But I have a question. I'm going to throw a question open to the panel. So it's interesting. We said on a space point of view, using the same space parameters that we have now, we know we'll be able to process many more passengers through a lot of the facilities with the use of technologies. But my question is, given COVID and given these things, we're all aware of the IATA level of service standards. And typically they are, you're standing in an immigration queue, you have 1 square meter per person. You're standing in a security queue, you have 1 square meter per person. With COVID, if everybody has to stay 2 meters apart, each person needs 4 square meters. So you can imagine that, in those bad situations where everybody needs 4 square meters versus 1, that could be quite problematic. Even if you lessen that to 1 meter, if you're wearing masks or however they develop the rules, you're still looking at 2 square meters, which, versus 1, which, could have significant implications. But I guess, my question to the panel is, do you see maybe the IATA level of service requirements being adjusted in the future to maybe take into account some of these things? Or, I guess as George has sort of described, you have different threat levels. So under different threat levels, you use different rules. So you stick with the basic rules. So I'll just throw that open to start some discussion.
Yeah, I would like to jump in, Peter. So that's a great question. So I think there is like at least three facets to that. So one is you can increase capacity, processing capacity at a higher, threat level or health alert level, right? So you can use technology and other things to make that happen and to be able to kind of quickly go into that higher gear, for example. But you can also increase capacity by, activating some additional, decentralized sites or nearby sites where you kind of add that additional processing capacity. You also kind of spread your demand to maybe 2 or 3 locations instead of a single location, right? Centralized location, which is the more efficient way of operating. Then also what you can do, you can have some metering, of the demand. So you actually start finding the demand in, deep, lesser chunks, if you wish, over time, if it's a higher alert level service, alert or security alert, that kind of stuff, right? And I think the third one, as you said, you can have, for green health alert level, these are the standards that apply, right? If we go into high gear, so it's a higher alert level, yes, you have to apply now, much more space per passenger. But then you have these additional measures that you can deploy at the same time, like you have your least, like procedure or process defining what you need to start doing at that kind of health alert level. So you have to activate the, 2, nearby, additional locations for immigration, for example, right? That are normally not used for that, or they're not, they might be used for something else and can be converted quickly into something that serves the purpose at a higher, health alert level, right? Those are the, I'll tell you, like on Jonathan's, I love what, just a quick digression, I love what Jonathan says. That's always my mantra in this business. What I've learned is that the change is the only constant in aviation business. We're always subject to changes, like regulatory, technology changes, business models of airlines change, everything changes, right? And then, and the business models, how airports are operated and financed also change. So you have to come up with, creative ways to subsidize your aeronautic information and all that. But what I'm getting at is that, like, the only difference this time is that the change is so profound and has shaken, the foundations of everything, that it hasn't been seen, this kind of disruption hasn't been seen in a long time. But I think the positive thing, and I always try to find positive in everything, is that this has triggered lots of creative, innovative thinking, and has accelerated lots of things like biometrics to come to fruition, because, as we were dragging our feet and, everybody's trying to find the common standards, etc., this has actually accelerated that, pushed the governments to actually work, faster on certain solutions. Like we had, I think it was maybe a couple of years ago, a pilot at the security check at Denver Airport, where you just walk through in between 2 panels, and there is no, wanding or, like AMD detector door, or there is no spraying in the, around thing. It's just you walk through, and that's all it takes, right? It's very convenient, promises higher throughput rates and all of that, right? That's just technology, right? And then, we've recently implemented again the so-called VeriFly. This is kind of a voluntary biometric program where you can sign up and you get dedicated lane, and it's much faster, more convenient. And, those are the kind of things. And then on the retail side, you do your, like, we've just launched the Eats Delivered at your gate company. So basically you can order your food and it gets delivered to you. And that's, again, going back to Jonathan's point about, every 1 in 4 passengers have told, in that survey that they're feeling anxious and, at the airport, right? Airlines, and we're also talking about, HEPA filters and all that. So people are actually at ease. And, to wrap it up, I would also say that, to Chris's point on, how, various segments of aviation travel might come back in a different form and shape and size, right? You're seeing that domestic and leisure and, VFR, visiting friends and relatives traffic is coming much faster and bouncing back in countries that are fortunate to have large domestic markets like the US, right? So those are the initial trends that we are seeing, because I'm sure, we humans always like, human personal interaction, and you always like to see your cousin or your friend, in person rather via, Zoom or Teams or whatever meeting, right? Even though it might be very convenient, but there are certain things where personal touch still prevails. And I think that certainly will keep the aviation business and the need to kind of globally connect, us thrive. Anyways, I went all the way from space to, but yeah, sorry. These are just my dump of my thoughts on, what Jonathan has triggered me thinking, and what Chris is, notes in your question, Peter. So yeah, I'll give it back to you. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, I'd like to make a comment here, and in my experience, build on this thing. The only constant that we really know is change, and so for me, like, whenever I'm involved with any terminal planning, especially, but also overall airport planning, when you're doing a master plan and you're doing the whole building blocks thing, and you go, where do the building blocks go? Like, where does the runway go? Where does the other runway go? Where does the big building block called terminal go? And I'm always looking at those really key things: flexibility, adaptability, expandability, because we know that whatever we say now, it's not going to work out that way, right? And so we have to be ready that the plan that we developed, it may not look like the plan that we developed. It might look like something else. And so that's where, like, when it comes to terminal planning, I am of the philosophy of, we need to go to the big box rule, right? A terminal has to be a big box, and a big, empty box. Well, not empty, but has to be a big box. And there's all these pieces inside, that you can move around. Check-in is here, and security is there. But you could move the pieces around, as required, in order to respond to the ever-changing requirements that come about. And then if it's a box, then you can extrude the box. The box can be extruded this way, the box can be extruded that way, whatever. And so I've always really gone, for very simple, simple simple concepts. Whereas, what happens when you work with architects? We've all worked with architects, right? I see there's no architects on here, so I can on the list, so I can say something. But we always want a really nice looking building, and and you want your building to be an architectural masterpiece to some degree. It's a public building, and everybody's going to see it, but there has to be a trade-off between what you do there, in terms of making it look good but remaining functional. And so definitely the whole big box theory concept keeps things very functional. Maybe not as good looking. I mean, who wants to take a Home Depot and say George Hohlacov International Airport, change the name. So, but you get the message, right? It can be, it can be very functional.
But I think that there is a way to kind of strike the balance, as you said, like make it functional and simple to kind of, be flexible, expandable, adjustable, and make it pretty, right? Because pretty is also very important, I think, because, you as a passenger want to feel, good, and feeling good then makes you, spend well as well. So, or, just the whole experience gets so much better, right? But I think there is a way actually, you know, keep it simple, not break the bank, and still make it very appealing, right? There are ways. I think you don't have to, you know, be building the Taj Mahal, you know, in order to make it happen. There are simpler and more affordable ways to make it happen, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Peter, I had one thing to add, a different perspective on what you just said, which is there's actually only one thing that's true about aviation demand forecasts, and that is they are always wrong. And they're sometimes even wrong in the short term. So I mentioned that $2 billion project I was working on in the Middle East, that had undergone a 3-year detailed planning and preliminary design exercise. We took it on under a design build contract. And I was astounded, and it wasn't the fault of the very competent architect who worked on it for 3 years. We took it over and spent a year changing all sorts of things, including the check-in. They had 120 check-in counters for different reasons. And so at the time we were even looking at Abu Dhabi and other places, they were doing check-in and bag check at hotels, convention centers, and in the parking lot, in the parking garage. And so we thought, well, we shouldn't really build this building for the next 20 years. And we started making changes. And so, yeah, change is the only constant, and flexibility. And, you know, it sort of sometimes requires thinking outside the box, because us as planners, we get so caught up in these numbers, and here's the peak hour, and here's the design day. Like this is what is going to be here 10 years from now. Well, the only thing that's true is, no, that's not what's going to be there 10 years from now, because things are going to change.
And that's definitely true. And you can see just how much creativity's gone in the last 6 months. I mean, who would have thought airports would be testing centers, right? I think our industry is at its best when our back is against the wall and we have to innovate and create and, like you said, think outside the box. Because to your point, business travel, like you said, is not coming back anytime soon. For us, which is, you know, we don't see a lot of business demand, so it's fine. You know, we're hopeful that our recovery will happen a lot sooner, because to everyone's point, you know, tourism is going to take off a lot faster than business travel. I just read something the other day that, you know, the death of the business class seat. And what does that look like now going forward for the airlines? Because now the airlines are going to almost have the Ryanair effect of, you know, okay, you'll get the business class seat relatively cheaply, but then there are going to be a million add-ons to make the experience that much more.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, actually, I see our time is up, and we do have a number of people in the audience. It looks like it's dwindled down a little. Can I ask, does anybody in the audience want to ask a question? And I guess the only way to ask a question initially is via chat. Or is that the case, William? Because I guess they can't turn their microphone on and ask a question, can they?
Yeah, I think you guys can into the chat box if there are any questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Chat box.
Okay.
Just
So
to the attendee panel.
Okay. Well. Okay. Well, all right. So if nobody had,
I would just add one more thing, Peter, that came to mind, and that's something I've been thinking about too. Is that, you know, the airports in particular, you know, that added resilience. If you're, you know, it's just like the same thing as in investing and making your portfolio, you know, as diversified as possible, so you don't put all the eggs in one basket. So surely our basket is certainly, you know, planes and passengers and bags and all this stuff, right? But kind of looking at ways to diversify your revenue streams, you know, with other aviation and non-aviation related, you know, developments, does help a lot. I think the bottom line in you know, times like this, right? And so also something to think about when it comes to future of like the overall airport planning, like things about, you know, airport cities, what is coined, but things that you can do in addition to your kind of main bread and butter activity, right? Well beyond like having good concession program and retail program and such in the terminal, but what can you offer and how that can help you basically diversifying your revenues. I think that in particular applies to the privately owned and operated airports because in times of crisis like this, I think they're in very, very tough position, and having such diversified sources or as diversified sources planned in advance with the airport development does help at times like this a lot.
Yeah, I mean, the focus of private airports have been to extract as much, commercial, opportunities as possible. But they in the past they've been focused on the passenger. So, trying to extract as much, as much money out of the pockets of the travelers as they go through, in a good way, to maximize their revenues. But it's all passenger driven. If those passengers are not there, then you can't do that, right? And so that diversifying, going to airport cities, or, in the case of, like for instance here at YVR, they constructed, what do you call it? Let's call it a shopping center, an outlet mall. Okay, it's an outlet mall, on land that the airport, did not need, and other, other airports, like I know, at LPIA, they're considering a hotel. The hotel, is sort of passenger driven, but there's other businesses in the area that the hotel would cater to. So, things like that help to diversify your revenue. So it's definitely, I think we will probably see more of that, in the future, in places where, they have the land or they have the space. A lot of airports do not have the luxury of diversifying. In fact, they're taking their activities and moving them off site. So, but okay, so we are, we are about 5 minutes over time. I guess we're not stealing anybody else's time or anybody else's space, so that's good. So I want to thank all three of you guys for your time and your excellent insights into this. I'm sure things will continue to change, and who knows, where will we be this time next year?
Thank you, Peter.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you all, guys. Very nice chatting with you.
All
and
right.
Thanks to all the attendants.
All right.